Hey guys, I'm taking a rare step out from behind the keyboard today to talk about the aesthetics of Pokemon Let's Go. If you found this video from somewhere other than my blog, please click the link in the description to see the first part of this Let's Go critique. Anyway, as you can see, Let's Go takes its design cues not from the latest 3DS games, Sun and Moon, but from X and Y from way back in 2013. The chibi models make a return, as do the blocky route designs. There's something quite unappealing to me about the way routes look in this style, because it very much feels like someone's dragged a Z-axis from routes that weren't really designed for one. As such, the whole thing feels very blocky and cramped, more like a Lego town than a real one. And while this style may have some appeal to some people, it really does strike me as a step back from the route design of Sun and Moon, which felt like a game designed around a 3D camera. My biggest problem with the Let's Go aesthetic, however, is that it feels very unambitious with how it translates Kanto into 3D. Many of the routes are exactly the same as they were in the Game Boy and Game Boy Advance regions, and the new aesthetic is so bland that it doesn't feel as exciting as it should to explore these areas anew. X and Y, for example, included areas that were more challenging to the game's camera, such as Lumiose City. And while these weren't always successful, there was some attempt made to push the aesthetic to its limits. I know some of you will say that comparing Let's Go to X and Y is unfair, because X and Y built its region from scratch to suit the visual style. However, there's luckily a closer comparison to be made, and that's with 2014's Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, remakes of the Game Boy Advance games from 2002. Like Let's Go, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire are extremely faithful to their original versions, but there are enough differences when the aesthetic was translated over to make them an interesting comparison point. There are some really small things, like the way the stars are reflected on the water on Route 120, and some bigger changes like the complete redesign of Moorville City or the abandoned ship. Looking at Moorville as a case example, it's clear just how much thought was put into redesigning Hoenn as compared to Kanto. The original Moorville in Ruby and Sapphire is a bland collection of houses and a gym, while the updated Moorville is a huge shopping centre/apartment complex that is much more in keeping with the theme of the city as a look into the technological future of the Pokemon world. Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, then, does what a good remake should do, and looks for places in the original that can be improved to better fit what the game was trying to communicate, and then improves them. For a nice counterexample, let's look at Cinnabar Island. In the original games, Cinnabar Island is home to the Pokemon Mansion where Mewtwo was created, as well as the Cinnabar Lab, where fossils can be revived using advanced technology. Looking at illustrated maps contemporary to the original games, you can also see Cinnabar Island has a mountain on it, something reconfirmed in the Generation 2 games, where revisiting Cinnabar Island reveals the mountain was a volcano that has since erupted and destroyed the town. So we have two things here that define Cinnabar: it's a centre of technology, and it has a volcano. The primitive sprites of the Game Boy version weren't able to communicate this visually, but surely the 2018 remakes will. Well, it's true that the outsides of the buildings had been redesigned, but the town itself looks exactly the same, with the volcano still nowhere to be seen. An Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire type reimagining of this town might have given the streets some new sci-fi texture, or had some fancy camera angles showing the volcano. Unfortunately, we get no such creative spirit here, and this is indicative of most of the game's locations. There are some areas of the game that do look appealing. The indoor locations have what Kotaku's Tim Rogers referred to as,
"It reminds me of a style that I thought had died with the PlayStation 2. It has all the charm and lived-in feel of Ape Escape 3, only now with Pokemon."
And that's a really nice way to look at it. But generally, it seems very uninventive. It's the flattest and laziest way to revamp the game, and one of my least favourite things about it. The Pokemon themselves also seem to have undergone some changes that I'm not overly fond of. The colour palette continues a trend of being more washed out than the Pokemon were in sprite form. You can see this pretty clearly just comparing the sprites of Bulbasaur to the models used for it in both the 6th generation games and in Let's Go. The models themselves are the same as in the last two generations, just upscaled and with new shading. Personally, I prefer the cel-shaded look of Pokemon. Having more saturated colours and more basic shading gives the Pokemon a stylized look that I think is more appealing than Let's Go's more realistic shading. While I'm looking at visuals, I want to talk about UI design and how terribly Let's Go approaches it. I'm going to be doing a pretty direct comparison between the UI of Let's Go and the UI of Ultra Sun and Moon, given that I see no real reason for there to be any major steps backwards in UI design between the two games. Let's start with the battle UI. In general, I'm more a fan of Let's Go's smoother and simpler designs than the crazy spiky edges of Sun and Moon's buttons, although I can't help but feel that Let's Go's does look a little mobile gamey. Still, what's important here are the features. Clicking on the moves list in Sun and Moon will bring up information about whether the move is effective, super effective, or not very effective against a certain Pokemon if you've battled it before. Why they didn't bring this feature over is crazy, because it's useful not just to first-time players, but even sometimes for me, when I forget exactly what combination of types a certain Pokemon is. Switching Pokemon has thankfully been left pretty untouched, as has using items from the bag, although in Let's Go the items aren't segmented into useful tabs as they are in Sun and Moon. Speaking of using the bag, let's talk about how that works in the overworld. Now, Sun and Moon have the horrible Rotom decks filling in the bottom screen the majority of the time, so both games need a button to open the menu and then another to open the bag. Sun and Moon have the advantage of being able to use two screens to show item information on, but even barring that, their bag is easier to navigate as you can simply use the circle pad to scroll through sections rather than having to click. This might seem a bit nitpicky so far, so let's get onto some more problematic changes. You can no longer, for example, use a healing item on your Pokemon from the Pokemon tab on your menu, instead having to go to the healing pocket in the bag. Accessing the map in Sun and Moon is a simple down arrow on the D-pad, but in Let's Go you have to open your bag first, and you can no longer fly to individual routes anymore, but only towns and cities. The Pokemon box is now a part of your bag, which is a useful if somewhat annoying addition. Taking a Pokemon out of your party is weirdly time-consuming, given that you first have to enter the box, then open your party menu in the box, and then click to remove it. As I mentioned, I don't like having a full team early on, so this was annoying for me. And even if it was only annoying for me, that doesn't mean the UI shouldn't be better designed here. For example, opening your box from your party menu should open it with the in-party pop-up already open. This also takes away from the decision-making aspect of party composition. Seeing as you can swap Pokemon in and out of your bag box freely outside battles, you no longer have to decide on a permanent team of 6 members. Instead, your party is functionally hundreds of members. Were HM slaves still a thing, then I get wanting easy access to the box, but now that they finally aren't, this feels like a bit of a fix to a problem that isn't there anymore. There's a distinct sloppiness and laziness to a lot of the design choices made in Let's Go. None of these UI problems are in themselves a huge problem, but instead the whole system feels clunky. It's also inexcusable that basic features added in Sun and Moon have been taken away here. In fact, aesthetically, the entire game feels like a step down from that one, and even in parts from X and Y and Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Partially, this can be attributed to the fact that I'm not a huge fan of the flatly lit, bright neon colours of Let's Go's Kanto, but even if the game's visual style was more to my taste than it currently is, I'd still feel disappointed by the lack of ambition on show.